Beijing, August 27th, 2025. Inside the familiar briefing hall of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the atmosphere was tense yet measured. Cameras clicked, journalists shuffled their papers, and all eyes turned toward the podium as Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Guo Jiakun entered. His words would be closely watched, not only in Beijing, but in Washington as well. Days after US President Donald Trump surprised many with an announcement that America would welcome 600,000 Chinese students, Beijing's reaction was not uncritical applause, but a carefully worded demand: words must be turned into action. Educational exchanges, Guo reminded the gathered reporters, are not just about degrees and universities. They are about bridges between societies, about communication, understanding, and trust. For decades, Chinese students have crossed the Pacific in search of opportunities, while American campuses have relied heavily on their tuition, their research, and their cultural presence. Yet in recent years, that bridge has been battered by suspicion. In his first term, Donald Trump had ushered in an era of heightened scrutiny of Chinese students, accusing them of being conduits for espionage and intellectual property theft. Universities saw visa applications delayed or denied, while students already in the United States faced interrogations and, in some cases, deportations. Even after Trump left office, many of these restrictions lingered. Now, with his return to political prominence and his unexpected declaration that America would accept 600,000 Chinese students, Beijing is listening, but cautiously. Guo Jiakun's statement was direct. He said, quote, "Educational exchanges and cooperation contribute to enhancing communication and understanding among people of all countries. We hope that the US side will translate President Trump's statement of welcoming Chinese students to study in America into concrete action, stop groundless harassment, questioning and repatriation of Chinese students, and effectively safeguard their legitimate rights and interests." The words were calm, but the underlying message was unmistakable. China is not content with declarations. It expects results. And those results, in Beijing's eyes, would mean an end to years of what it describes as unfair treatment of its students. The stakes are high. Before the pandemic and the spiraling geopolitical tensions, Chinese students made up more than 30% of all international students in the United States. They poured billions into the American higher education system, sustaining entire departments and sometimes keeping struggling universities afloat. For many Chinese families, sending children to America was not just a matter of education, but of pride, opportunity, and global connection. For Washington, however, the influx of Chinese students became entangled in fears of espionage, especially in sensitive fields like engineering, computer science, and biotechnology. Trump's latest statement suggests a reversal, or at least an adjustment, but Beijing's skepticism reflects its experience. For every policy announcement, there have often been multiple layers of enforcement on the ground, and it is at airports, in visa interviews, and in classrooms where students feel the consequences most sharply. That is why Guo Jiakun framed his response around concrete action, a diplomatic phrase that essentially means prove it. Yet the briefing did not end with education. Another issue quickly emerged, one that has long haunted US-China relations: nuclear weapons. Trump had recently stated that Washington and Moscow were in talks about reducing their nuclear arsenals and that he hoped to bring China into those negotiations. When asked about this, Guo Jiakun was blunt. He answered, quote, "China and the United States are not on the same level at all in terms of nuclear capabilities, and the two countries also differ vastly in nuclear policies and strategic security environments. It is neither reasonable nor realistic to require China to participate in trilateral nuclear disarmament negotiations with the US and Russia." The meaning was clear. Beijing does not see itself as a nuclear peer to Washington or Moscow. While the United States and Russia each possess thousands of nuclear warheads, China's arsenal is estimated at a few hundred. For Beijing, being drawn into trilateral talks would be tantamount to accepting an artificial parity that does not exist. Instead, China has long insisted that it prefers broader frameworks, ones that account for missile defense systems, space-based weapons, and regional security balances. Taken together, Guo's two responses, one about education, the other about nuclear arms, point to a consistent theme in Chinese diplomacy: cautious openness combined with firm red lines. On one hand, China positions itself as supportive of exchanges, cooperation, and mutual understanding. On the other, it pushes back firmly when it feels demands are unrealistic or when it believes its sovereignty and interests are being challenged. This duality reflects China's strategic approach in 2025. Domestically, it wants to reassure its people that the government is defending their rights, whether those rights belong to students abroad or to citizens concerned about national security. Internationally, it wants to appear as the reasonable actor, one willing to talk but unwilling to be pressured into disadvantageous agreements. For students, the human dimension is inescapable. Every year, hundreds of thousands of young Chinese leave home to study abroad, and for many, the United States remains the most desirable destination. They arrive with dreams of joining prestigious universities, contributing to research, and gaining global perspectives. Yet their journeys have often been overshadowed by suspicion. Reports of students being questioned about their research, forced to undergo invasive screenings, or even being denied entry at the border have created a climate of anxiety. Beijing's call for an end to what it describes as groundless harassment reflects this reality. It is not simply a matter of political rhetoric. It is a reflection of complaints raised by students and families over the past several years. For them, Trump's statement of welcome must be matched by real change at consulates, at customs, and in classrooms. Meanwhile, on the nuclear question, Beijing's posture underscores its determination not to be dragged into a framework that it sees as fundamentally unbalanced. While Washington and Moscow debate reductions from thousands of warheads, China sees little incentive to freeze or cap its arsenal when it is already dwarfed by its rivals. Instead, Chinese officials argue that the responsibility lies with the two largest nuclear powers to make deeper cuts first. These twin messages, openness to cooperation on education, resistance on nuclear talks, illustrate the careful balance Beijing is striking in its dealings with the Trump administration. They also highlight the unpredictability of Trump's own approach. In the space of a week, the US president has both extended a hand to Chinese students and raised the specter of new nuclear negotiations. For Beijing, the challenge is to respond in a way that protects its interests without appearing intransigent. As the briefing ended and Guo Jiakun stepped away from the podium, the message he left behind was pointed but restrained. China is willing to engage, but it is not willing to be taken for granted. 600,000 students may indeed find their way to American universities, but only if policies change on the ground. And nuclear disarmament may remain a subject of global debate, but China will not be pressured into negotiations it considers unequal. In the words of Beijing's spokesman, the US must turn words into concrete action. Until then, Chinese officials will continue to watch, wait, and remind Washington that promises alone will not rebuild trust.